Hi all, I want to look at a round 4 game from the European Championship between Michael Adams playing for England against Emanuel Berg playing for Sweden. Adams won this game in a fine positional manner, which we're about to see. He played e4 and the opponent played the French defence, and now Adams played knight d2, which is the Tarrasch variation, which he's got a very good track record with. The opponent played knight f6, so he's avoiding the c5 line because he probably doesn't want the isolated queen's pawn, which Adams is renowned in playing against. So this is the advanced variation of the Tarrasch, and you'll see that black's trying to undermine the d4 pawn as usual, and now played a very interesting offbeat move, g6. Adams responded to this with h4, so already we've got the scene set for a very exciting game now. What is black up to by playing this early g6? Black now played h6, and Adams retreated the bishop to c2. And black now gained space on the queen side with b5, and Adams now just castled. Black now continued the queen side expansion, and playing classically, the e5 square was just overprotected with rook e1 now. Black captured on d4, which does kind of fix that centre, so the tension's been resolved. And this gives white extra freedom now, perhaps, to manoeuvre on the king side, if necessary. In this position, though, black had a very aggressive idea in mind. It's to play g5. There's one slight problem with this whole plan, though, in that white's going to be stronger on this side of the board, because a lot of pieces are focused on that side of the board. Even though the white king's over here, does black have really enough attacking resources to do a decent attack, or will these pawns end up being weak? What we're about to witness is an Adams demolition job of the king side, because after the g4, black's really committing these pawns forward. So knight f to h2 and h5. So are these pawns weak, or will they be useful for a king side attack? The h pawn is in pre, so Adams defends that, and now black plays queen b6, so d4's under fire as well. But these pawns are fixed and kind of frozen at the moment. So first of all, Adams deals with the d4 square. He consolidates it with bishop e3. Remember that art of war saying, first consolidate your position before going on to the attack. So the d4 square is first consolidated to reinforce it. Now rook c1 was played here, and after castle queenside, white now started going on the attack, and not against the black king, where black is strong on this side of the board, but on the king side where his king is. He played f3, and we see now first the isolation of black pawns, then their removal. So after g takes f3, knight takes f3, we see now that this pawn is much more vulnerable now, and this pawn is also potentially vulnerable, being on this semi-open f-file. So let's see how Adams manages to get both of these pawns and keep black's counterplay neutralised on the other sides of the board, or areas of the board. So bishop e7, rook f2. So we see this is under attack potentially now. King b7, and now knight g5. So we see also the queen's potentially being used to attack this h-pawn. Black now decided to give up that dark squared bishop and double white's pawns. Okay, so white has these weaknesses, but they're difficult for black to exploit, because he hasn't got the resources really there to exploit all the dark squared bishop to exploit this one. So in fact, these double pawns are more useful for white, because they create interesting squares, especially f4 and h4, as we're going to see now. After rook df8, Adams plays rook f4, which was enabled by that fg, and the rook can now switch in here and target this h-pawn. So this is starting to be a nice positional demonstration. Queen d8, rook h4, knight b6, and this pawn can be taken now. But first, Adams neutralises a bit the counterplay possibilities of knight c4 by playing b3. And after b4, he now plays knight h2. So at leisure he can take this pawn, but he didn't want any possibility of bishop takes f1. He wanted to keep this knight on, because it might be useful to reinforce the d4 square, say with knight f3. After knight c8 he played bishop b1, knight 8 e7, so black is potentially manoeuvring to one of these two squares, but now Adams captures that pawn. So the next victim on the king side will be this pawn. So after rook takes and queen takes, the queen's now attacking this pawn, and also it's still on that semi-open file, of course. Queen b6, and now rook c5 to stop any counterplay with knight takes d4, knight takes e5. This is not on at the moment. So black's kingside and centre counterplay is still being neutralised here. Queen at f3 now, knight d7. So the rook moves, and after knight c6, again a consolidation before going on to a second phase of the attack with queen f2, consolidating the f2 diagonal and the d4 square. And white also has to watch out for knight takes e5 sometimes if there's a pin on the king here. So it's all clear at the moment for the second wave of attack against this pawn. So knight g4, and the knight's going to swing potentially to h6 to attack this pawn. After rook c7, king h2, a4. So black's trying to get some counterplay on the queen side, but it's not really happening. So this second pawn is being victimised now, the f7 pawn. And white just exchanged rooks here, and now played bishop c2. And black desperately was trying to generate counterplay, played bishop c4. And it could probably be taken. But maybe, Adams didn't want these two passed pawns or any complications. He just brutally carried on with the demolition of the king side, because he wants to accelerate the path of this g-pawn. And the g-pawn starts being pushed now, and the knight can even support its queening square. So we see now the king side being invaded, black's being a bit desperate on this side of the board, and Adams is just ignoring things, just to queen his pawn. And black's in a totally hopeless position. This pawn isn't going to queen, and in this position black resigned. So let's have a look at the game in conclusion and summary. French defence Tarrasch variation, advanced variation. Adams was content to allow black to move these pawns forward because they came sitting targets. But notice the process of consolidating the d4 square at the same time as attacking these vulnerable pawns. So the first target of attack was the h5 pawn, and notice how black's queenside counterplay is kept under control. And again here with the rook c5s to stop any knight d4s. And Adams even retreated back the queen to f2, so it had gone back from h5 to f2, just to consolidate first, before the second wave of attack, which liberated the g-pawn. And Adams could start ignoring the things happening over this side of the board, and just queen his pawn. So this is great just to avoid the complications, and ruthlessly pursue just the strategy of simply queening your g-pawn, to leave a completely won position. So that was a fine positional demonstration, and shows you what can happen when the opponent plays a bit too aggressively on the side of the board which they're actually quite weak on, in principle. So it was a fine illustrative game, I thought, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks very much, and see you on YouTube.